All right, let's dive right into AI liability.
Sounds good.
So as AI gets more and more sophisticated, it's really not just about what it can do. It's also about, well, who's on the hook when things go sideways?
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to unpack today. We're looking at excerpts from AI liability in software development projects.
Oh,
It
interesting.
really digs into this whole legal issue, and it's timely.
Yeah.
This isn't some far-off sci-fi dilemma. This is like real-world stuff, consequences for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a fast-moving target too. The legal system, it's really struggling to keep pace with how quickly AI is evolving. Like those traditional ideas of, intent or fault. It's not a clean fit when you're dealing with systems that learn and make their own calls.
Yeah, you can't exactly point the finger at a faulty part like you would with a car, right?
Uh,
It's all so much more complex with AI. So how are lawmakers even approaching this? Where do you even start?
Well, the EU's kind of leading the way, I think. They've got this AI Act, and it's all about a risk-based approach. So basically, they're looking at AI systems and grouping them based on, well, how much potential harm they could cause.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, for example, some stuff is just totally off limits because the risk is way too high. Imagine like an AI deciding who gets life-saving surgery. That's just unacceptable, right?
Yeah, I can see that being a hard line.
Exactly. So some things are just completely banned.
Okay, so that's the extreme end. What about the AI that is allowed? How does that work?
Right. So then you've got what they call high-risk AI, things like in healthcare or self-driving cars, that sort of thing.
Makes sense. High stakes there.
Yeah, and there are super strict regulations for these systems,
Mhm.
testing, data quality, human oversight, the whole nine yards. It's all about balancing innovation with, making sure people are protected.
Right, higher stakes, tighter controls. So I guess then, like, on the other end of the spectrum, you've got AI that's recommending music or maybe writing marketing copy that's lower risk, right?
Exactly. The EU AI Act, it classifies those as low risk. They still have some regulations, of course, but it's much lighter touch.
Okay, so it's not a free-for-all, but the focus is more on letting innovation happen in those areas.
Right. And here's the interesting thing. Because of this whole risk-based approach, you as the user, you might start to see more transparency from companies about how they're using AI, especially in those high-risk areas.
That's a really good point. I mean, more transparency is generally a good thing, right? But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the people actually building all this tech. The source we're looking at, it really hammers home this idea of risk assessment for developers.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely essential, I'd say. Developers and the clients they work with, they really need to take a hard look at every part of the project. Like, what are the goals? What data are we using to train this thing? What about security measures? How much human oversight will there be? It's not just about protecting themselves legally. It's about being upfront with clients about what could potentially go wrong.
So it's like a safety net, but also a way to build trust with the people using the AI,
Very
right?
thought it.
But, I mean, even with the best planning, things can still go off the rails. And that brings us back to this big question of liability. Who's actually responsible when AI causes harm? That's where things get really, really tricky.
No kidding.
The text keeps bringing up this concept of proportional liability as a potential solution.
Okay, interesting.
So what is that exactly?
So think of it like splitting a restaurant bill.
Okay.
If the AI project is the meal, everyone at the table, the developers, the company using the AI, maybe even some third parties, they all chip in based on how much they ordered and how risky their choices were.
I see. So it's not about pointing the finger at one person. It's
Yeah.
about figuring out each party's contribution to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, wouldn't that be a total nightmare to figure out legally? Like, how do you even quantify each person's share of responsibility?
That's the million-dollar question, right? You definitely need clear legal frameworks and guidelines to make sure it's fair and consistent. And then, well, things get even more complicated when you add in the big AI platform developers.
Oh, right. We're talking about the companies building the foundations for so much of this stuff,
Yeah.
like OpenAI, Google AI, Microsoft, that level.
Yeah.
So what happens if the problem starts within their platforms, like the actual tools that developers are using? Who takes the blame then?
Well, that's where this whole proportional liability thing gets really interesting, I think. Like, let's say you've got an AI model and it was trained on a platform, but during that training, it accidentally used some copyrighted material.
Oh, yeah.
So now you could have the developer, the one who built the model, you've
Yeah.
got the client, the one using it, and you've got the platform provider, the one that supplied the data for training. All of them could potentially share some responsibility.
Whoa, so it's like this legal domino effect that the fault could like ripple through the entire AI ecosystem.
Right, exactly.
But how do you even begin to sort that out in court? It seems impossible.
It wouldn't be easy, that's for sure. But I think this approach, at least it recognizes that AI is all interconnected. Everyone involved, they've got a part to play in making sure things are done responsibly.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But kind of shifting gears a bit here, the text also talks about how it's hard to predict how AI will act, especially with machine learning. So how can you hold someone accountable for what a system does when it's constantly learning and changing?
It's a massive challenge for sure. It's almost like trying to hold a parent responsible for what their kid does. You can teach them right from wrong, but you can't predict every choice they make, you know?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. So how do we even approach liability then when the tech itself is so unpredictable?
Well, that's what's kind of cool about this proportional framework. It's trying to find a balance, encouraging innovation, but also recognizing that even the best developers can't see every possible outcome.
So it's like accepting that there's going to be some risk with AI, but you still got to have ways to make sure people are owning up to their part in the process.
Exactly. And as AI gets more sophisticated, this idea of shared responsibility, it's only going to become more important.
For sure. But this all makes me wonder, like, what can everyday people, like our listeners, what can they do to help shape how AI is developed and regulated? It's easy to feel kind of powerless with all these big tech changes happening.
Yeah, I get that. But I think it's important to remember we're not just bystanders here. We're all users of this technology. So our choices matter. Our voices matter.
So what can we actually do to make a difference?
Well, first off, stay informed, right? Understand the potential benefits and the risks of AI. Have conversations like this one. And share your concerns with policymakers.
Okay, so listening to this deep dive is a good start. But what else?
Support companies that are transparent about their AI. The ones that are prioritizing ethical considerations. Advocate for regulations that actually protect users and promote responsible development. And don't be afraid to ask questions, like challenge the assumptions behind AI systems and demand accountability when things go wrong.
So taking an active interest in speaking up, that's crucial, right? We can't just let the big tech companies decide the future of AI.
Absolutely. We all have a stake in shaping this technology for the better. And that actually brings us to another key point from the text, this idea of transparency. The more developers and companies are upfront about how their AI works, the better we can all understand the risks and make informed decisions.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's like giving us an instruction manual for how to use AI responsibly.
Right.
Like tell us what it can do, what it can't do, how it makes choices when humans still need to be involved.
Exactly. And that transparency, it needs to continue throughout the entire life of the AI, not just during development. Because as these systems learn and adapt, new risks pop up. So you got to have that open communication between the builders and the users.
It's not a set it and forget it situation. You got to keep an eye on AI, reassess it, and make sure it's still working safely and responsibly.
For sure. And this whole transparency thing, it goes for the data that's used to train AI models too. Remember that copyright infringement issue we talked about?
Yeah.
Developers and their clients, they need to know that the data they're getting from these platform developers, that it's ethically sourced and doesn't violate any IP rights.
It's like if the foundation is shaky, the whole thing could come crumbling down, right?
Exactly, like building a house on a bad foundation.
Yeah.
You're just asking for trouble.
I see what you mean. But even with the best intentions and all the right safeguards in place, it seems like we're bound to hit some bumps in the road, right? I mean, as AI gets more powerful, more widespread.
Oh, absolutely. There will always be unknowns, things we couldn't have predicted. That's why it's so important to have ongoing research, keep thinking about the ethics, and have legal frameworks that can adapt. We're in uncharted territory, so we got to be cautious, but also ready to learn and change as we go.
Well said. So it sounds like the future of AI, it's not about finding perfect answers. It's about creating an environment where there's collaboration, transparency, and accountability.
Exactly. We got to work together to make sure this technology is used for good, not for harm.
I like that. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot, from defining AI liability to individual action and the importance of transparency. But we're not quite done yet. All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dive on AI liability. So before we wrap up, I'm curious, what's been the biggest takeaway for you from all this?
You know, What really strikes me is it's like we're having to rewrite the rules of the legal playbook as we, go further into this whole world of intelligent machines, like all those classic concepts of, responsibility, blame, even intention. AI really challenges all of that.
Yeah, it's like trying to force a square peg into a round hole, right?
Yeah.
Making these old legal frameworks deal with tech that works in a completely different way.
Exactly. And that's why I think these conversations about AI liability are so important. We're like grappling with really big questions about how we even define responsibility when machines are making more and more decisions.
It's not just theoretical either,
Hmm.
right? This has real consequences for everyone, from the people building the tech to the people using it.
Absolutely. And that's why I think being aware and taking action, it's so important. Like we were talking about earlier, we can't just sit back and accept whatever's happening. We've got to stay informed, ask the tough questions, and hold people accountable.
So for our listeners who want to be more proactive, what's one key piece of advice you would give them?
Don't be afraid to, push back a little. Just because a company says their AI is objective or unbiased, that doesn't automatically make it true. Dig deeper, try to understand how these systems actually work, and don't be afraid to speak up if you're concerned.
Yeah, we can't just blindly trust that the tech giants will do the right thing. We all need to be critical and play a part in how this technology is developed and used.
Exactly. It's about making sure that transparency, accountability, ethical considerations, all of that, that it's built into AI development from the very beginning.
Well said. Sounds like navigating this AI future, it's going to take a healthy amount of skepticism, a commitment to staying informed, and the courage to speak up for what we believe in.
Couldn't agree more. It's a team effort,
Oh.
and everyone's voice counts.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into this complex and constantly evolving world of AI liability. A huge thanks to Scopic for giving us all this amazing information for today's discussion.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
Until next time, folks, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep pushing those boundaries of knowledge.